So yes, I guess it's lovely to see you all, or will see you all, or I guess it's very difficult to know how to start these things on a Zoom call. But if you are here, you should be here for my Gen Z activism to entrepreneurship webinar. And if you're watching back on YouTube, then that's what you've clicked onto. So the reason why I wanted to do a webinar about Gen Z and the way we behave online, it mainly started probably around a year and a half ago. I was asked by the DigiFairy, who are a creative agency in London, to contribute to their report about Gen Z. And I was a bit like, I'm a sociology student when I'm not freelance journaling and other bits. So I was a bit hesitant to help because I didn't feel I had much to say. And then after a couple of weeks of consulting with them about Gen Z, I started to really get involved in the subject and realised that it has everything to do with me as a 21-year-old woman. And the report is actually available to view. It's free to download on that web link that is up on your screen now. And today I'll be kind of going through, I'll touch on bits that I said in the report, and it's loosely based on that, but I think the report is a lot of qualitative and quantitative data. So if you're kind of into more of the stats and statistics about the generation as a whole, then I would highly recommend checking it out. It's also done in a super interactive, cool way. There's lots of pictures, lots of infographics. It's not a boring report. It's actually really well done. And the rest of the reports are all very interesting to read. So I would highly recommend going to check that out. It's also, what was I going to say? It's also done as a podcast and a YouTube video. So I first would like to talk a little bit about myself, because I think when talking about Gen Z and the way we behave online, I kind of come at it from my perspective and how I've grown up online and how growing up online has shaped my career. So I guess I started in journalism when I was about 13. I started in broadcasting. I then moved to online TV. All of this was done on a very much hobby basis, and something that I'm going to touch on later, this idea of, I think our generation are so keen on monetizing our hobbies, and in a way that is so different from generations before, in the sense of we've had the internet to have that modem. Sorry, this is so annoying, but I have sat in front of a window and I can see all my neighbours going past and everyone keeps waving at me. So if I wave, then I'm very sorry for being unprofessional. But anyways, yes. So I started off when I was 13 in broadcasting and then online television, and that was all done on a hobby basis. And from there have monetized these hobbies to create my career, which is a concept that I will go on to explain. And from writing and online journalism, I gained an internship at The Guardian, and that was all done and all happened simply because I was so active online. I'd found out about the internship online. I followed people online that had done the internship, and I think that has so much to do with growing up in a rural area and growing up in a rural place. I think the internet has become a place for Gen Z, not just to find information, but to find community. And I think that is so linking with a lot of other young people in my generation too. So that's a little bit about myself. I guess where the activism and entrepreneurship comes in is understanding how Gen Z behave online and why they behave the way they do. I also would like to leave you with something that you can take on in your own practice, whether you are wanting to reach a Gen Z audience or wanting to learn from the way we've used the internet to create our careers. And leave you with a little bit of advice on that. So that's how I will end today. But firstly, I'm going to talk a little bit about activism. So this quote was taken, it's by myself, it was taken from the report, and it has a lot of links with my sociology background. I think the way Gen Z use the internet is so different from generations before because we're so open online. I remember when I started my Instagram and I look on previous posts and I think about like how I literally just said how I felt all the time, no filter. I think now I'm a little bit more cautious with having employers and people watching. But when I first started using the internet, it was a place, and social media in particular, it was a place to express how I felt and express my beliefs and what I stood up for. Previous generations have done this in different ways, whether or not that be protesting or writing or through other mediums. But this idea of harnessing social media as a diary space very much comes from this generation. And in terms of social categorisation, I think online we categorise ourselves all the time, and we form our behaviour based on groups we want to see online. And it's this whole idea of fitting in, and it's a physical thing you see as well, but more so online. It presents itself in a different way where young people follow different trends to fit in with different groups. I think the rise of TikTok is particularly interesting in discussing this. And when I was researching this, I really wanted to have some up-to-date information because a lot of the information I was using from what I'd researched last year. And there actually really isn't a lot of quantitative and qualitative research into how TikTok has shaped the way young people have viewed themselves, because I guess it's such a new media. I remember a year ago I was consulting with the EU on a project on how they could bring more young people on, and one of my colleagues, she's from Croatia, and she was talking about how it would be really cool if the Intellectual Property Office for the EU used TikTok to make information about the EU more accessible. And I just laughed at her and was like, that would not work. No one uses TikTok. And then a year later, I'm on it and watch TikToks all the time. So it's just interesting how fast-paced the world has become. I don't think in previous generations they saw such a rapid increase of new technology and new media. And this curation online comes from this openness, and I think this ability to share how you're feeling. Gen Z behave the way they behave online because I think there's a sense of loss of control. I think that every kind of generation that is young, the young are always a lot more progressive than the old. You know, you see this in patterns previous to this generation. It's not just this generation that have that, but this idea of saying how you feel and feeling like your feelings are valid. I think that there's a lot more openness and expression about this, which is dictative of the patterns that I will now go on to explain. Yeah, so this openness online has led to, I'm going to cover two strands. There's so many strands we could cover, and I would highly recommend, again, reading the report or having a look at the report because they kind of go more into all the different depths. But I'd really like to talk to you today about how this openness online has led to better activism and the changing of the term activism and what it actually means to be an activist, and in terms of mental health, environmental, racism, LGBTQ plus issues, and this idea of entrepreneurship, how Depop culture has not shaped this generation, but this generation has shaped the culture, and how that links closely with sustainability, and like I said again, monetizing hobbies and the Glossier effect is something that I'm particularly interested in. I listen to a lot of business podcasts with Emily Weiss because I think she just has such an incredible business model that is really focused on consumer rather than previous models, and I think that that has been shaped by this generation's behaviours online. Okay, so activism. There's three different strands of activism. There's global activism, and those Gen Z global activists can be seen as like Malala, um, and Malala and Greta Thunberg, and these are global activists that we see in the media in the mainstream. And I think this is so based on social media. Their work they're doing is physical and it is real and it is change that you can see in the world, but their message and their ethos has been spread online in a way that generations haven't done before. And also it's made young people more active. I think this generation are so wanting to respond to what they see in the world, and it's that response and that showing that they care and showing that they care online has led to mainstream media adopting that. We can see that with new documentaries coming out about sustainability, and new documentaries that reflect the views and values of this generation. And yeah, I do believe that that comes from young people speaking out online. And there's three different, I think, levels of involvement in activism. I think something a little kind of discourse I find in the term activist is that, for example, I remember when I started off speaking at conferences, I was called a diversity activist or a representation activist. And I had a lot of discourse with that title for myself, which I talk a lot about in the report. And it's kind of this idea that I talk about things I experience. I talk about why representation matters because it is something that I faced every day in my career. It's not a cause, it is my lived reality. So me complaining about, or me talking online about how I've experienced racism in the workplace, it's not a form of activism for me. For me, that is just me expressing how I feel and my lived experience. And that's where I think these three strands of activism come in. So activism is people like community leaders that create change physically and are leading change. Advocates are people that contribute to change physically in the sense of attending marches, making signs, poster campaigns, that sort of thing. And then a collectivist is people that maybe don't necessarily campaign regularly or incite social change within their community, but are actively signing petitions and contributing to sharing infographics and certain things like that. And I think online, I see these three strands, and a lot of social commentarists see these three strands, but I think that there is a general consensus with the public that, oh, young people are all activists. If you post something online, then that makes you an activist, which is, I don't believe, true. I think there's different levels to that, and it's something that gets overlooked in the media, that we are just blanketed as more active. But I think whilst it's easier to be an activist and easier to speak out about these issues, it's actually a lot harder to see that quantitative change, because you can post something online, but whether or not that behaviour is translated to the reality, the lived reality of where you live and the society around you, it's a lot difficult to measure when all your activism, or most of our activism, is done online. Yes, so from social media to mainstream media, I think it's interesting to see how Gen Z have shaped the media around them. I've taken one example of Elaine Welteroth, who is a young Black writer, journalist, and she became editor of Teen Vogue, and it was so interesting to see the change from Teen Vogue going from, in the early 2000s, as a girly kind of magazine about pop culture, to really tackling issues that are real and that are facing all of us. This tweet I thought was really funny because obviously talking about communism and Karl Marx is definitely not something that I would have read in Teen Vogue when I was younger, but it's interesting to see that that is the way that the magazine has been led since then. And it's all from, I think, on a side note, it's definitely her input as an editor has been based on representing and reflecting the generation now. And I think when I did the report into Gen Z, on the launch of the report, we did a panel discussion that was a debate on whether or not Gen Z were going to change the world, and they put me on the against side because they know I'm very much for, which was interesting to look at it from a different perspective than the one I would naturally fall on. And I think what's interesting is whilst Gen Z are changing this culture around, you know, Teen Vogue expressing more issues about social issues and Netflix putting out more documentaries on social issues, we're not really, I don't think we're seeing that lived in reality in the society we live in. And that could just be because we're living in a bit of an echo chamber, where the media we consume is the media that reflects us. And whilst there is a growing number of young people that are sharing how they feel and speaking out about issues and speaking out for the undermined, there is a growing confidence in young right-wing activists as well. And I know that that's not very politically correct to say, but you know, it's all good to share different beliefs, but if your beliefs are limiting the rights and the lived realities of people that are more disadvantaged than you, then it's also giving a platform for people like that. And this idea of cancel culture has come very much from the internet, where we see people that don't align with our views and we immediately block them out or ridicule them, and there's less of a conversation in the sense of changing people's beliefs if they don't agree with you, rather than simply cancelling them. And cancel culture is very much different. If someone shares a belief that you don't agree with, it's whether or not you choose to educate them or whether or not you choose to berate them. Often berating them can do more harm than good, which I think is something our generation are yet to understand, because we definitely hold our beliefs and values close to our hearts. Yes, I think that's everything I had to say on that. Yeah, and mental health. So something that came up a lot in the report was Gen Z nihilism, and it's not something that I actually thought of until I was really asked upon it. And I think this sense of impending doom comes from the lack of control about the world around us. I mean, Donald Trump is president. Who thought that was going to happen? And this lack of control has meant that young people have turned to the internet or Gen Z have turned to the internet to share how they feel. And I realise that I've spelled nihilism wrong, so apologies about that. But yeah, turning to the internet to share how they feel, and this openness online and humour. I said something in the report where we're all open to talk about our mental health, but I know personally sharing a meme about how I want to die is a lot easier than starting an honest conversation with my friends about mental health, which I think in itself has its problems, but has led to this generation being a lot more open to talk about our mental health because we find ways to do it in humour. And for me growing up, not necessarily now because obviously they shut, Rookie magazine, which was started by Tavi Jevonson, was so important and so influential in the way I behave online and who I am as a journalist. I think I was a lot more open to talk about my feelings and my mental health and my diagnosis because of what I read in Rookie. And seeing young people and young women particularly being so open about the way they feel and the way they react is something that I think was very iconic to this generation. And Rookie was a safe place to go online for a lot of young women. And going into this new generation of Gen Alpha, my sister's 12, so she's kind of on that cusp. I call her Gen Alpha because I don't really want to be classed as the same generation as a 12-year-old, but oh well. And I think that as more openness is become online, there's also been a lot of dangers in the sense of protecting young people from seeing information and seeing content that isn't safe for them. Or I know that when I grew up online, there was a lot of things that I saw that I was far too young to see, and that is a possible negative of this generation and growing up online and Gen Z and the internet. But yeah, that Vice article as to what Burki meant to a generation of young women, it's actually really interesting to see how that business model and how that community really impacted the young women that we have today online. And yeah, a little bit more about myself. So I became a consultant mainly through my work with Instagram. I was asked by Instagram if I would take over the social media of what was the Debrief. They are no longer, unfortunately. And I was specifically asked to do this as a young person online to educate and to show them how they can use their social media to reach this audience. I think in previous generations, the media was always the one that influenced the public. They decided what was going to happen. They decided the trends that were going to happen. But I think now, with citizen journalism and the rise of citizen journalism, and the fact that everyone has a platform now, whether that big or small, it's meant that the media has to reflect what is shown through the people. And yeah, I think it's really interesting that I was called an inspirational teenager you should follow on Instagram, because all I ever do is talk about how I feel. I never really saw it as inspirational or what I was doing to be a social media strategy. But I've now been helping companies and organizations to come up with strategy to involve more young people, and I just find that really interesting, that the fact that being Gen Z and just simply expressing myself online in a vulnerable way has led to creating a career and being helping other big organizations try and connect with an audience. But also in a less sort of consumer way, I became Girl Gaze ambassador. Now, Girl Gaze are a social media movement which started on Instagram, where they were highlighting female filmmakers and female photographers on subverting this male gaze of our media. And they're an Instagram account that I followed for ages and ages. And so when I applied to be an ambassador, I was really, really proud that I was selected, because I think they just do such incredible work, and if you don't follow them already, you definitely should. And as my role as an ambassador, it's been great to connect with other young people and other young creative women in film and TV, and not just young women, but also older women and different generations, and hear their perspective on the industry. That growing up online has given me a community, as I've said again, and that would not have happened if I wasn't Gen Z and if I didn't grow up online. I could definitely do an entire webinar, or watch an entire webinar about Black Lives Matter. It's such a topical issue right now, but in a way that it's come to light, but people have been dealing with this for years, and young people have been talking about these issues online for years. And the fact that mainstream media had covered George Floyd's death in the way they did is what has made it become so widespread, because before I would see videos and tweets of so many young Black families and young Black people that I follow sharing their lived experiences, posting videos, but nothing would happen. And I'm just very glad that mainstream media decided to cover George Floyd's death, because it has meant that more people have started to listen and educate and change their minds on that. And I don't really want to talk too much about it because I'm not a Black woman, but it just left it there as an example of how Gen Z have used the internet to really connect and change other people's perspective on the issue. I think what's also interesting is this rise of performative activism that has happened because of the Black Lives Matter movement, and we can see that with the whole Black Square trend. I think with the people I follow on Instagram, I saw a lot of people calling it out and saying, if you're posting it, can you also post resources? But I know that another number of, for example, my sister, who's 12 years old, her social media, she saw it all over the place, but was like, well, what does that actually do? And I think one flaw maybe of this generation is that we're so quick to post and support, but whether or not that posting and supporting is only skin deep is yet to be discovered. I think we'll see that in the future. Oh, I'm going backwards. Am I? No. Yeah, okay. Environmental activism. These are two examples of environmental activists. So I was talking before about 3 levels of activism: global, local, and national. I guess Noga Levy Rappaport is probably local and national, and Jack Scap would be national and global as well, I think. Noga is a young environmental activist from London. She's also a friend of mine, and she led the climate strikes down in London and is an incredible speaker. I think it's interesting that environmental activism is getting its forefront now, and you'll see everywhere that it is led by young people. The movement is being led by young people, and is being led online. And yeah, she's an incredible speaker. I would definitely consider following the work she does, because the reason why I wanted to talk about her is I'm heavily involved with the Children's Media Conference. Last year I was producing and moderating some panels there, and Noga gave a speech at the keynote, and it really shook the audience in a way that her speech in the opening last year shaped the entire conference structure this year. And she really was calling for real active change from adults. And it was so interesting to see the way she just spoke candidly to a room full of BBC execs, Sony execs, Disney execs, about just do something. As a young woman herself who's just recently turned 18, I don't think she would have been given that platform had she not been active online and had coverage online, and was asked to speak at the conference because of that. And then the impact of her speaking on that conference meant that it shaped the conference structure this year, which I am also heavily involved with. I think Jack Scap are an interesting case study to look at, because they started online just vlogging and doing fun videos, and now they have started a platform, which I've linked there, to educate people about the environment and the climate crisis that we are currently in. I think more and more this pattern of coming online to express how you feel and then realizing that there's something you can do about it is a pattern of behavior that we've seen in the Gen Z generation quite a few times. And Depop culture. So we're kind of moving into the more entrepreneur side of the webinar. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Depop culture. If you want to know more about Depop culture, I really encourage you listening to, there was a podcast that I was a part of. It was part of the panel I did in Soho House in London, and we had Jack Maitland, who works with community down at Depop, and spoke a lot about how Gen Z have shaped the way Depop works and the company works, which is really interesting. I think it comes also from this idea of monetizing our hobbies. A lot of people, their Depop shop isn't just somewhere where they sell their own clothes. It is a brand, and this idea of social categorisation. I thought this meme was really funny, because there's lots of tribes of social categorisation, and Depop is closely linked to a few of them. It also is all linked to this idea of sustainability as well. as we can see by this, I looked at this business of fashion graph, and it's interesting that the second-hand clothes market is expected to nearly double by 2023. And I think that is a direct result of the rise of Depop culture and the way charity shops have moved online almost. We are now seeing that there is a commodification of Depop culture, meaning there are people buying things, a gentrification rather, not commodification, of Depop culture, where a lot of middle class young people are buying to sell on their Depop shops, which definitely, there's a lot of contradictions in Gen Z, isn't sustainable, especially for families that shop at charity shops, not for aesthetic, but because of financial reasons. I think that, you know, there's a lot of good that Gen Z have done in terms of activism, but it can be seen as performative and can sometimes have counter issues such as gentrification, which we all thought was a millennial issue, but I think we're starting to see a little bit in the rise of Depop culture. Yes, and linking very closely to that is sustainability and monetizing our online presence. I know I definitely did it. I think when I started, I did it in a very wasn't thinking about it way. I spoke a lot about what I liked online, what I didn't like online, and I tagged brands in it, not really to get their attention, but just so that people that I followed knew who I was talking about. And I think with this rise of influencer culture, that has changed in the sense of everyone wants to be an influencer, everyone wants to get free stuff. And I remember I've got my first Glossier package in the post and was like, oh my goodness, why are they sending this? And I think it's interesting to see how that has shifted to becoming a goal for a lot of young people online, is just being online to make money, and could be seen as a negative, I suppose. But also as a young working class woman, the internet was so accessible for me, and it gave me an opportunity to create a brand for myself and create a career for myself. An example of this is Grace Beverley. Now, I remember I followed her for years. She's a great case study of this. She started off as a YouTuber vlogging about uni and health mostly, and now owns multiple sustainable fitness and health brands, and is doing really well. And the reason why she's doing well is because she is reflective of this Gen Z value and culture in a very genuine way. Before, there was quite a disconnect between brands and companies and the people that they were pitching to, but now Gen Z feel very much a part of the company because they reflect their values. Grace is a person that a lot of young people feel like she's her best friend because they've watched her vlog her uni career for years, and that closeness and her genuine personality and nature that she's built from years of creating not only an online presence but an online community has led to her being able to create a very, very successful business model, which I think is a new business model that has come out of the way Gen Z use the internet, and will be seen as generations go on. I think that is definitely the future of companies becoming closer to their audience and their consumer. And this is very much the Glossier model. Glossier started this model, and as I said, Emily Weiss, I listened to all the business podcasts with her because she started off writing her blog, interviewing people when she was doing internships, and from there created a beauty brand that is successful widely, and so reflective of this generation. And it's because of her closeness to her consumers and her closeness to the people that she sells to. And I guess this idea of being more vulnerable online is all linked to this as well. And so what's next? How can you reach Gen Z? So I'm not really sure what all your backgrounds might be. I'm kind of thinking if you are a brand, or if you are just an artist, or if you are a journalist and you're looking to reach a Gen Z, you have to be where they are. I think what's really interesting when I was looking at research for this and research into Gen Z, a lot of the research is so out of date because it's done by people who are measuring numbers and not speaking. And there's so much nuance in this generation, and everything's changing rapidly, that being where young people are, being on TikTok, being genuine, being on Instagram, and seeking them out is how you can reach a Gen Z audience in an accessible way, finding them where they are and listening. It's listening to the fact that this generation, I wouldn't say we're more socially conscious, but we're socially conscious and we talk about it as well. Every generation that is young, I think, is more progressive than the generation older to them. You know, the generation before us campaigned and marched and protested. We campaign, march and protest. I'm not saying that the social change we create will be bigger, it will be different, and it's happened because we've grown up online. And what you can learn from us. I think this idea of being vulnerable, I think Gen Z really championed that. This idea of expressing how you feel in a meaningful way, that comes from Gen Z. And monetizing your hobbies, I guess, like, you should definitely have things for yourself. But I think, like, thinking about it for myself, if I don't see it as monetizing my hobbies. I do what I love. I love writing. I love journalism. I love talking to people about ways they can do things better. I never thought I'd like being a consultant. I've recently produced things and I've been enjoying that. And I would definitely say I would do all those things for free, and those things make me feel happy. But they also pay my bills, which is great. And I think you should definitely have things that you keep for yourself, that you do for fun and don't monetize. But there's definitely an argument for doing what you love, and why not get paid for it. So learning that from them as well. I feel like there's loads I've missed because I haven't really looked at my notes, and I've just kind of gone off at a tangent. But I know we have Q&A session now, which we'll go on to. But just before then, that's a couple of further reading and sources of things I read. There's definitely more than these, but these are kind of a few for now, and obviously the report that I was talking about throughout. And yeah, if you'd like to email me, that's my email. Zoe Daniel is currently going under another rebrand, so she's not up at the moment, the website, but she will be soon. And that's my social media where I'm probably most active. So thank you. I really hope that you learned something new, or made you think about something differently, or you've gone away thinking about the way you do things and behave online differently. But thank you for listening. Thank you for your time. I think we're going on to a Q&A now.